A new fault line has emerged in Thai society, from a color-coded crisis that has split the Thai society down the middle between the yellow shirts and the red shirts. The country is now grappling with a deep generational divide led by young, energetic and bold youths who are calling for change and comprehensive reforms in the country.
คือผมคิดว่าการต่อสู้ครั้งนี้มันเป็นการต่อสู้ครั้งประวัติศาสตร์ของประเทศไทย
Now it's the conflict of the generation.
Since September last year, groups of students and young people have been organizing mass rallies demanding political reforms. They're also calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan
คือรัฐบาลนี้ไม่ได้ทำให้ประชาชนมีความสุขรัฐบาลนี้ทำให้ประชาชนไม่กล้าที่จะพูดมากกว่า
The government is being very patient.
What has led to the emergence of this new phenomenon in Thailand? Will this new fault line be permanent? And if so, can the fight be sustained? It's another calm and peaceful day in Bangkok ever since the start of the new year. The streets are awash with pedestrians. Worshippers are praying and offering tributes to their deities, while street vendors are going about their daily business freely, unperturbed by the turn of events of the past few months. The political turbulence that swept the Thai capital since September last year is but a distant memory. A semblance of calm has now returned to the capital. But amidst the order and tranquility, deep emotions are bubbling beneath the surface. Just in December last year, tens of thousands of Thai students held a major rally in protest against the political establishment demanding political reforms. The rise of these restless and angry young people also marks the evolution of a new fault line in Thai society. Today, the conflict is no longer defined by colors, but a generational divide between the young and the older generations, between the new and the old established political order.
So I think youth believe that it has come to a certain point now that they have to stand up and ask, these governments, whether what they're doing could help them, to survive or to even develop further and make Thailand to become more internationally accepted, which is most of the arguments is all based on their future. So I think this is very important development where the colors, the center, the rule thing now has become a generation thing instead.
For almost 2 decades, Thai history has been littered with long periods of political crisis, prompting the military to intervene and restore order in the country. Since the 2006 military coup that brought down former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, Thailand has been embroiled in a constant fight for political influence between the red shirt camp aligned to Thaksin and the yellow shirts who are loosely linked to the military and the royal establishment. In 2010, the protests staged by the red shirts escalated into violent confrontation between the protesters and the military. More than 80 people were killed in the incident. For many people, like 60-year-old Sirima Tarijaru, that era represented a dark phase in Thai political history. A series of protests and military coups then led to the downfall of several democratically elected prime ministers linked to fugitive former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. The owner of a real estate agency and a small hostel in Bangkok says the protests were extremely disruptive to her daily life and businesses.
ส่งผลกระทบค่ะในอย่างแรกเลยนะคะก็ในด้านชีวิตประจำวันทางด้านเศรษฐกิจมีผลทำให้การที่เราทำธุรกิจการค้าหรือแม้แต่ทำโปรเจกต์ต่างๆโปรเจกต์ที่กำลังจะอนุมัติกำลังจะได้ หรือว่าการดีลต่างๆนี่จะต้องมีการชะลอออกไปก็คิดว่าความรู้สึกของประชาชนนะคะคนทั่วๆไปก็รู้สึกว่าประเทศสั่นคลอนแล้วก็คนข้างนอกต่างประเทศที่มองเข้ามาก็จะมีความรู้สึกว่าประเทศนี้เริ่มมีความไม่มั่นคงทางการเมือง
Underpinning the red and yellow shirt protests was a rural-urban divide. The red shirts were represented mostly by workers and peasants from outside Bangkok. They had benefited immensely from the populist development policies of former Prime Minister Thaksin. So, when he was removed from office through a military coup in 2006, it did not go down well with the red shirt movement. The conservative royalists and urban middle class yellow shirts camp, on the other hand, had accused Thaksin of corruption. They also perceived Mr. Thaksin as being a threat to the monarchy and wanted him and all his political proxies to be permanently removed from power.
So that is why from 2009, I would say, we went into this particular deep conflict. We saw a crackdown in the center of Bangkok in 2010, and then we've seen conflict and another coup again in 2014. So this is the whole kind of idea that the conflict is based on these two particular groups, the middle classes in Bangkok, including the elites, which they call themselves the royalists, and then you have the rural platform, people who believe that democracy helped them, so they could develop, they could grow, and they could have the confidence to demand for equality, or more, I would say, equity within the resources that has been centralized in Bangkok.
One by one, political parties and those who were linked to Thaksin Shinawatra were removed from office, even though they were popularly elected by the people in open elections. Among them were former Prime Ministers Samak Sudaravet and Thaksin's brother-in-law Somchai Wongsuwat. Even Thaksin's sister Yingluck Shinawatra was not spared. In May 2014, Thai Army General Prayut Chan staged a military coup and removed Yingluck from office. It was a result of months of violent demonstrations against her controversial political amnesty bill. They argued that the bill could allow for the return of former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra from his self-imposed exile overseas. Until today, Sirima still opposes the military takeover back in 2014, which removed Ms. Yingluck from power.
อย่างที่บอกว่าแต่ว่าในเหตุการณ์ตอนนั้นเนี่ยมันสืบเนื่องจากการที่ไม่ชอบรัฐบาลไม่ชอบการบริหารรัฐบาลไม่ถูกใจหรือว่ามีความต้องการอื่นก็แล้วแต่เนี่ยไม่รอในการที่จะให้ตัวเองเนี่ยอยู่ในระบอบประชาธิปไตยและไม่รักษาระบบนะคะทำให้เกิดเหตุการณ์ต่อเนื่องและรุนแรงขึ้นนะคะจนทำให้เกิดเหตุการณ์เหมาะสมที่ทหารจะเข้ามาค่ะ
I think at that point the military felt that in order to keep peace in the country and in order to set things right beyond what had happened throughout the decades prior to when they were staging the coup, they might have had the idea that it was a need for them to keep peace and order in the country. Therefore, they staged a coup.
But since grabbing power in 2014 through a military coup, General Prayut has remained in office until today. First, as the leader of a military government, and then as the head of a quasi-civilian government 5 years later after winning the 2019 general election. He has also promulgated a military-drafted constitution that ensures the military's continued involvement in politics.
The government under General Prayut Chan has done tremendously well over the last 6 years. And the infrastructure, for example, has progressed in terms of the basic infrastructure, whether it will be the rail, the airport, the highway, the road. There are many extensions and many new projects. In terms of the economy, the Thai government has also been attracting local and the foreign investor through different many projects. And in terms of the ease of doing business, the laws that is obstructing the ease of doing business in Thailand has already been adjusted so that the competitiveness in Thailand will be progress in a better way.
However, not everyone agrees with the observation that the government has done a good job in managing the country.
ทหารมีทหารคืออำนาจมาจากปลายกระบอกปืนดังนั้นพลเอกประยุทธ์เนี่ยทหารไม่ได้ถูกฝึกให้บริหารแต่ทหารถูกฝึกมาเพื่อความมั่นคงดังนั้นยุทธวิธีของทหารคือเน้นไปที่เป้าหมายและใช้ยุทธวิธีการเพื่อให้ได้อำนาจนั้นมาเมื่อทหารมาบริหารประเทศทหารก็จะใช้เป้าหมายและวิธีการแต่สิ่งที่จะทำให้คงซึ่งวิธีการได้คือการใช้อำนาจในเชิงกฎหมายนั้นคุณจะเห็นว่ารัฐในปัจจุบันที่ดำรงอยู่ภายใต้ทหารเมื่อเศรษฐกิจโลกเปลี่ยนแล้วโลกเปลี่ยนแปลงไปภายใต้การเปลี่ยนแปลงของไวรัสครั้งยิ่งใหญ่เขาปรับตัวไม่ทันเพราะเขาไม่ได้รองรับที่จะเปลี่ยนแปลงต่อสถานการณ์ที่เกิดขึ้นแบบนี้ความคิดอ่านไม่ทันอันนี้เป็นความล้มเหลวอันที่สองคือไร้ประสิทธิภาพเพราะตั้งแต่ปี 57 ที่พลเอกประยุทธ์เข้ามาคุณจะเห็นว่า
And gradually, the ground has begun to shift. The political divide between the red and the yellow shirt movements is no longer visible, and a new fault line is emerging. This time, it's coming from a broad-based and organic youth movement, which is challenging the established centers of power to undertake radical reforms. Among them is 22-year-old political science graduate from Thammasat University, Prayut Chan. He feels that 6 years' rule by the Prayut-led government has not brought significant improvements to the lives of the people in Thailand. If anything, it has only made it worse.
ก็มีคำกล่าวนะครับว่ารัฐบาลประยุทธ์เนี่ยทำให้บ้านเมืองสงบเงียบโดยเฉพาะอย่างยิ่งที่ร้านค้าตลาดแล้วก็ห้างนะฮะก็คือเศรษฐกิจเราก็เงียบมากคือจะต้องบอกว่าในช่วง6 ปีที่ผ่านมาเนี่ยคือเราเงียบก็จริงแต่เป็นการความเงียบที่กัดก่อนทำลายประเทศไทยไปเรื่อยๆเศรษฐกิจเราพังพินาศถึงขนาดที่ว่ายังไม่แน่ใจเลยว่าคอที่จะเกิดจากเผด็จการที่มันคอยสูบเลือดสูบเนื้อไม่สนใจความเป็นอยู่ของคนทั่วไปสนใจแค่ว่าจะรักษาอำนาจตัวเองยังไงดังนั้นถ้าเราปล่อยไว้โดยที่ไม่ส่งเสียงออกมาเนี่ยประเทศเราก็จะผุพังก่อนไปตามเวลาแล้วมันจะสายเกินแก้แล้วจึงต้องลุกขึ้นมาสู้ตอนนี้
The youth movement has so far made 3 key demands: an end to Prayut's rule, reform of the monarchy, and change to the current military-drafted constitution.
ดังนั้นเราต้องเอาประยุทธ์และระบอบเขาทั้งหมดพวกพ้องเขาทั้งหมดออกไปเพื่อทำลายเครือข่ายอำนาจเผด็จการที่ฝังวางตั้งแต่ปี 49 และถ่วงเรามาเรื่อยๆนะตั้งแต่ 49 57 จนถึงปัจจุบันนะครับผมข้อที่ 2 เราต้องการร่างรัฐธรรมนูญฉบับใหม่เราต้องการรัฐธรรมนูญฉบับประชาชนที่ประชาชนเป็นคนร่างที่มีสภาร่างรัฐธรรมนูญที่มาจากประชาชนข้อที่ 3 เราต้องการปฏิรูปสถาบันคือในยุคปัจจุบันเนี่ยประเทศไทยเรากำลังก้าวเข้าสู่สภาวะที่เรียกว่าระบบสมบูรณาญาสิทธิราชย์ใหม่ฮะ Neo Absolutism คือกษัตริย์มีอำนาจมากเกินไปเกิดสภาวะพระราชอำนาจล้นเกินนะฮะ
Thai economy has not been performing very well. In the past 7 years, we are growing lower than our ability, as the economists say. Students are losing jobs. They're not getting even new jobs, so that it's becoming a problem.
With an ironclad conviction, these young leaders have rallied thousands of people to their cause. Their voices filled public squares, calling for the dissolution of parliament. And they appear fearless in the face of both the police and the army as they continue to chant anti-establishment slogans. Until today, the government insists that the door for negotiations remain open.
First of all, the Thai government support the right for the people to protest peacefully. And in the recent months, the Thai government have not blocked any freedom of speech if they do so under the circumstances of under the law and order under the current constitution. Even the criticism towards the government, the government listen to the criticism towards the government and try to find the fine solution for them to actually come together to have a conclusion.
But some observers are not convinced that there's been any serious dialogue to try to put an end to the political impasse.
When the part of the NCPO became the government, they carry on the saga of the NCPO, trying to keep order, trying to command the country. I think that was the unhappiness of the protesters. And they still carry that on and were saying that they wanted to protect the country. I think there has not been a serious talk between the two parts. They were talking against each other but never sat down and talked.
With both sides unwilling to back down, patience appears to be running thin. Will the government be forced to use the strong arm of the law to bring an end to the protests? Will it succeed? October 16, 2020, at the main shopping district in Bangkok, Thai police blasted pro-democracy protesters with water cannons and tear gas. It was the first time that such forceful methods were used to try and put an end to the ongoing anti-government demonstrations. Water cannons and tear gas were used yet again on November 8th, when another massive protest broke out at the Grand Palace. Scores of people were arrested for their involvement in the anti-government rallies in defiance against the ban on political gatherings. Protest leaders have also been charged under the country's strict Lese Majeste laws, which forbids anyone from insulting the monarchy. Under Section 112 of the country's penal code, anyone found guilty of Lese Majeste Law faces a prison sentence of between 3 and 15 years. Since November of last year, at least 35 people have been charged under the law. Among them is protest leader Prayut Chan. He faces 7 charges, while fellow protest leader Pasaravali Thanakit Vibunpun faces 2. In spite of the indictment, both Prayut and Pasaravali remain unfazed.
คือรถน้ำก็มาแล้ว112ก็มาแล้วเราก็ยังไม่มีทีท่าว่าจะหยุดเพราะอะไรคะเพราะว่าประชาชนทุกคนรู้แล้วว่าสิ่งที่เขาออกมาทำตรงนี้มันคือสิ่งที่ถูกต้องอะแล้วเขาสามารถทำได้อะไม่ว่ารัฐบาลไหนก็จะไม่มีทางมาหยุดตรงนี้ได้เพราะว่าอะไรเพราะสิ่งที่ประชาชนทุกคนออกมาเรียกร้องเนี่ยค่ะเราออกมาเรียกร้องในความบิดเบี้ยวของสังคมในตอนนี้แล้วเราอยากแก้ไขให้มันดีขึ้นเรามีจุดประสงค์ที่ดีเรามีความหวังดีเรามีความสุจริตใจที่อยากให้สังคมนี้ดีขึ้นจริงๆเพราะฉะนั้นสิ่งที่เราออกมาพูดสิ่งที่เราออกมายืนยันเนี่ยมันไม่ใช่เรื่องที่ผิดและมันเป็นสิ่งที่ใครที่เป็นพลเมืองไทยก็ทำได้หนูจะตีความอย่างนี้เลยก็ได้ว่าณตอนนี้รัฐบาลประยุทธ์จันทร์โอชาเนี่ยพยายามที่จะไม่ให้ประชาชนได้รับประชาธิปไตยอย่างแท้จริงซึ่งอันนี้น่ากลัวแล้วถ้าในมุมกลับกันนะคะวันนี้ประชาชนเข้าใจแล้วว่ารัฐบาลเริ่มมีกลิ่นไม่ดีอะแล้วเริ่มมีจุดประสงค์ที่ดูเหมือนไม่ค่อยหวังดีกับประชาชนแบบเนี้ยแล้วคุณคิดว่าประชาชนจะอยู่เฉยๆหรอ
ผมเคยถูกขู่ฆ่าไม่ใช่รอบเดียวด้วยผมเคยถูกขู่ฆ่ามีคนมาด้อมๆมองผมขู่จะเอาชีวิตผมทำร้ายรุ่นพี่ที่รู้จักแล้วก็ปล่อยข่าวว่าจะทำร้ายผมด้วยทั้งหมดเนี้ยมันเคยเกิดขึ้นกับผมเข้าคุกก็เคยเข้ามาแล้วผมคิดว่าทั้งหมดที่ผมเผชิญอยู่นี่มันจิ๊บจ้อยมากเมื่อเทียบกับว่าประเทศชาติทั้งประเทศเนี่ยมันจะเกิดอะไรขึ้นถ้าเราตัดสินใจที่จะนิ่งเฉยถ้าเราตัดสินใจที่จะให้เผด็จการศักดินาเนี่ยกัดกินประเทศเราไปเรื่อยๆเราก็เลยต้องลุกขึ้นมาสู้ฮะทั้งหมดที่ ทั้งหมดนี้เป็นความกังวลส่วนตัวผมถือว่าเรื่องส่วนตัวเนี่ยใหญ่เท่าไหร่มันก็เป็นเรื่องเล็กเมื่อเทียบกับเรื่องส่วนรวม
Until today, the government maintains that it supports the right of the people to protest, but they must do it within the confines of the law or face the consequences.
The government support the right of the people to express, but in a constructive way and in a way that will help the societies to go forward rather than to defamatory remarks and try to make the conflicts happen in the countries. And in the past, I think the demonstrator they remarked more of trying to being offensive and try not to respect the other right of the people, let alone the head of the government and the head of the state. And so under the law of this constitution, the police will have to take action, and then the verdict will be decided by the court, not the government. So hopefully the demonstrator will understand that.
But instead of heeding the government's call, the protesters responded by asking that the Lese Majeste Law be scrapped altogether.
แล้วก็ต้องยิ่งพูดคุยถกเถียงกันว่าโทษที่มีอยู่นะตอนนี้เหมาะสมหรือไม่การที่กฎหมายนี้มีอยู่มันทับซ้อนกับกฎหมายอื่นหรือเปล่าหรือมันจำเป็นมากน้อยแค่ไหนที่จะต้องจำเป็นต้องมีกฎหมายนี้แล้วในสากลโลกล่ะเขามีกฎหมายตัวนี้ไหมหรือถึงมีโทษเขาเป็นอย่างไรหนูว่าช่วงนี้เป็นช่วงที่หลายๆคนเริ่มพูดถึงเรื่องนี้กันอย่างจริงจังแล้วหลังจากนี้จะถูกหลังจากนี้ค่ะมาตรา 112 เนี่ยจะถูกหยิบยกขึ้นมาพิจารณาอย่างจริงจังโดยที่คนในสังคมจะเป็นคนตัดสินเองแล้วว่ามันควรจะต้องมีหรือไม่มี
Some observers believe that there are many quarters who agree that such a law may have to be reviewed, even among the conservatives.
There have been some arguments within, the conservative part as well, by saying that, look, the problem is we have to reform 112. Why? Because it's too wide. It's too open. Anybody can go and say this person has said something. So you have a very broad kind of parameters within the law itself. So they want to rationalize it to a certain extent. Not everything that you talk about the monarchy and automatically it would be regarded as 112 is incorrect. So even for the conservatives, they're asking for that.
Well, I think scrapping or repealing is not reasonable, okay? But revising, especially in terms of the imprisonment, okay, from 3 years up to 15 years, that might be one of the things that we can revise. Secondly, the way in which it is used, most of the time there has been political reason behind the use of lèse-majesté. So we have to do away with the political reason. It has to be legal reason. If someone is really insulting, is really defaming His Majesty the King, and then it's wrong under Section 112 of the Penal Code, then that is why we are using it. Thirdly, I think we have to make an understanding why we are having this sort of law. Is it to protect everyone, also the head of state? However, because the importance of the head of state, therefore the imprisonment or the fine is more than if it happens to ordinary people. I think if we make some understanding like this and we try to talk and try to find a way in which we keep the protection for the head of state as well as the protection for any other ordinary person, I think that understanding will bring about the way in which Section 112 can be used properly.
To date, more than a dozen leaders of the movement have been already charged under Thailand's Lese Majeste laws. Many of them might even end up spending time behind bars. Will these tougher measures adopted by the government have the effect of weakening the youth movement? Will it simply fizzle off?
คิดว่าไม่ฮะคิดว่าจะทำให้ขบวนการต่อสู้แข็งกร้าวขึ้นคืออย่าลืมว่าในการชุมนุมช่วงที่ผ่านมาช่วงที่กระแสรุนแรงที่สุดคือช่วงที่จับแกนนำไปนะฮะผู้ชุมนุมก็ไม่ได้ออกมาเพราะเริ่มใส่ศรัทธาในตัวผู้นำคนนั้นนะฮะเขาออกมาแค่เพราะเขาคิดว่าเวทีนี้เนี่ยสะท้อนสิ่งที่เขาคิดได้เป็นตัวแทนของเขาดังนั้นคนที่ขึ้นไปพูด คือผู้แทนของผู้ชุมนุมไม่ใช่ผู้นำของผู้ชุมนุมดังนั้นการจับกลุ่มเนี่ยคือคุณจับผู้แทนเขาอะฮะการที่คุณจับคนที่ลุกขึ้นมาพูดในความเชื่อหนึ่งมันย่อมสะท้อนเทือนมันย่อมไปทำให้คนที่เชื่อเหมือนกันรู้สึกว่าคุณกำลังทำร้ายพวกเขาด้วยเราเป็นผู้แทนของเขาคุณทำร้ายผู้แทนของเขานั่นแสดงว่าคุณทำร้ายความเชื่อความคิดของคนหมู่มากนะครับผมดังนั้นเชื่อว่าการจับกลุ่มการทำร้ายตัวผู้ปราศัยตัวผู้จัดการชุมนุมไม่ว่าจะทางใดก็ตามเนี่ยมันไม่ได้ทำให้การต่อสู้มันแผ่วลงครับมันจะทำให้การต่อสู้มันเดือดขึ้น
It might deter certain individuals who are leaders, those who have family, those who have other things that they have to worry about. Yes, we might see few of them stepping back, but I think there are others who are very willing, to step up. I think the government has miscalculated by believing that putting these charges and eventually give them pardon, but between that time frame, it would deter the movement of the leaders or the protest itself. I don't think that's the case. It would provoke even more anger.
As the protest leaders await their fate and press on with their calls for democratic reform, another institution has come under the spotlight, one that is deeply revered in Thailand, the monarchy. What is causing these changing attitudes towards the sacred institutions of the country? The Thai monarchy is known as one of the kingdom's 3 pillars. It's also the bedrock of the country's national identity, along with nation and religion. Together, they form the foundation of state ideology. The king lies at the apex of power in Thailand, enjoying a demigod-like status. This is especially true for the late King Bhumibol Adulyadej, widely known as the People's King, who dedicated his life to alleviating the plight of the poor through various development projects which he initiated. King Bhumibol was also seen as a symbol of unity and a stabilizing influence for the Thai society during times of crisis. Among those who hold the late king in high regard is Sulak Sivaraksa, a self-proclaimed royalist and an ardent supporter of the monarchy. The 88-year-old is also a prolific writer who has written on various subject matters including philosophy, Buddhism, and the monarchy. He says that the reason why the late king was so loved was because of all the wonderful things that he did during his lifetime, as well as the bond which he created with the people.
His Majesty was a remarkable man, and he reigned for 70 years. He came to the throne very young, and he left the throne very old, the longest reigning monarch of this country. He contributed so much for the country as well as for the dynasty. On the whole, people loved him. He traveled everywhere in the country, and he had many royal projects to help the people.
His death at the age of 88 in October 2016 therefore sparked an outpouring of grief nationwide as the people mourned the end of an era. A year-long period of mourning was then observed for the much-revered monarch who ruled Thailand for 70 years. Upon his death, his son, King Mahavajiralongkorn, ascended the throne at the age of 64. He's the country's 10th monarch. But to this day, he has not been able to command the same adoration that his late father received during his long reign as king. Sulak, however, has only good things to say about the current king. He feels that the previous king had done so much for the people that it makes it harder for the current king to match his father's outstanding achievements. In other words, the shoes left behind by his father are simply too big to fill.
The new king, of course, came to the throne at the elderly age, over 60. And of course, his father had done so much, so the king find it difficult to do something to follow the footsteps of his father. But he tried. For instance, he had a lot of people volunteer to clean the canal, to do many, many good things. Unlike his father used to go up and down the country himself. The present king had a good intention, but he sent people up and down the country instead of himself. He sent privy councillors on the whole. But I feel he also means well for his people.
Well-meaning as he may be, King Vajiralongkorn's reign has not been without controversy. While his father spent a lot of time traveling the length and breadth of the country and attending to the needs of his people, the new king has come under close scrutiny by the Thai public for spending most of his time in Germany, ruling the kingdom from abroad. Since claiming the throne, he has taken personal control of the crown's assets, estimated to be worth some $30 billion, and put 2 army units under his direct command. The royalty has also hit international headlines for all the wrong reasons. Gradually, the image of the monarchy in the minds of the people begins to shift. 21-year-old Napat Chonrumlek is a student at Thammasat University, majoring in political science and international relations. He feels that the king has not acted in a manner befitting his status.
I don't know, not really good picture much. We see some news about him and a lot of scandal that all happen. Like it's obviously, but he not behaving like the way that's supposed to be. We born under the country that have monarchy, but it's kind of like different. It's not like England or European country that they have really such like that. Because in Thailand they tend to make a institution become more individual.
มีการเพิ่มงบประมาณมากมายมีการโอนกำลังทหารเข้าไปเป็นทหารส่วนตัวของกษัตริย์ภาษีก็ถูกใช้จ่ายอย่างฟุ่มเฟือยในสภาพที่ประชาชนอดอยากแต่งบประมาณเพิ่มขึ้นจนถึงตอนนี้ไป37,000 ล้านแล้วฮะมากกว่ากระทรวงบางกระทรวงที่มันสำคัญต่อการบริหารราชการประเทศนี้ซะอีกนะครับผม
All of a sudden, an issue once considered sensitive and taboo has now become a subject of an open and intense debate among members of the Thai public. Thanks to the students who've campaigned actively to try and reform the third rail of Thai politics, the monarchy.
No one would believe that one day we would be able to talk about the monarchy as an institution, openly in the society. Even though I've been reading news for the past decade, it's because of these students' movements that is why we could really talk about this on the television shows. Before it was a taboo.
As part of their demands, the protesters are urging the monarchy to renounce its royal fortune worth billions of dollars and hand them over to the poor. They would also like to see that the palace's powers be curbed, especially with reference to Section 112 of the Penal Code, a defamation law which forbids anyone from insulting, defaming, or threatening the king. Under the law, those found guilty of the offense will face between 3 and 15 years imprisonment, thereby shielding the monarchy from scrutiny and criticisms. But these demands have not gone down well with the government.
The king is above politics. The royal family, the royal monarchy is above politics. So it is under the Thai government to duty to protect the institution. And I think it is also the duty of the Thai citizen to do so as well.
Should the government simply ignore all the demands by the students? Or should a compromise be reached sooner before the situation spirals out of control? From July till November last year, Thailand was rocked by a series of massive anti-government demonstrations. Young people, mainly students, took to the streets demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan, amendments to the constitution and reform of the monarchy. But since then, it has been quiet on all fronts. Until today, there have been no major protests on the streets of Bangkok following the imposition of a more severe state of emergency in the capital. Uneasy calm has now returned to the city as it grapples with the rising number of coronavirus cases of late. From 4,000 in November, the number of infections has risen to more than 12,000 cases today. All public gatherings have been banned nationwide in a bid to contain the spread of the virus. And that has forced the students to take a break and scale down their activities. But not the government. It has so far charged 41 people with insulting the royalty, including many student leaders, under the country's Lese Majeste Law.
I think they have already been warned that they are doing something that is not according to the law. And I think the police will have their duty to put forward the case to the court, and it will be decided by the court whether what their actions is violating the rules and whether it will be any action against the leaders or not. It's not the government task to actually tell them whether they are doing the right or the wrong thing, but it is the police task at the moment to make sure that the society is being kept in a peaceful way and under the law and order at the moment.
Tough as the move may be for the students, some observers believe the use of the law against the protest leaders will not have significant impact on the movement. It will not cause the movement to weaken. Neither will it disintegrate or fade away.
If it was our generation, if we've heard 112, we'll be very scared and we'll stop, because we know that once you get into all these courts, tangles and so on, and in the past we've seen, big political parties being dissolved because of these charges and so on. So people are very worried, so they are scared. But I think students go beyond that, and they say that okay, bring it on, and I think they believe that they have the support from the society. They push the boundaries further, but they didn't see that people left them. People didn't leave them. People didn't say that, oh, we're going to not support you anymore because of your views of the monarchy. I think they feel that they receive more support from the society. And it's quite interesting. As far as I've been to mob many times, I've seen older generations of people joining in the protests.
ตอนนี้รูปการมันเปลี่ยนไปนะฮะ คือแม้แต่ royalist คนที่เขาเป็น royalist มาทั้งชีวิตเนี่ย เขาก็ไม่สามารถที่จะปฏิเสธการปฏิรูปสถาบันกษัตริย์ได้ คุณอนันต์ ปัญญาชุน คุณสุรักษ์ศิวรักษ์ พวกนี้เป็น royalist คนกลุ่มนี้เป็น royalist ที่ขึ้นชื่อทั้งนั้นนะฮะ เขาก็สนับสนุนการเรียกร้องปฏิรูปสถาบันกษัตริย์ เพราะเขาก็เห็นว่าสถาบันกษัตริย์ไม่สามารถจะดำรงอยู่ได้อย่างสง่างาม โดยที่มันยังเป็นเช่นนี้ได้
A self-proclaimed royalist, Sulak Sivaraksa, for example, is not averse to the idea of a reform of the monarchy. While he regards the monarchy as a sacred institution which has to be defended at all costs, he feels that it should also keep pace with the times.
Well, everything needs to be reformed, whether royalty, monarchy, even Buddhism also needs to be reformed. Everything changing all the time. You cannot resist the change. But if you change wisely, appropriately, that's good. If you resist the change, that tend to be unwise. The Article 112 of the Criminal Code is a bad thing. The late king spoke personally, openly to the public, that whoever used this law was harming him personally and undermined the monarchy. And the present king, when he came to the throne, he wrote, I was told, personally to the Supreme Court judge as well as to the Attorney General not to use this law anymore. And if the government who claims to be loyal to the throne should have this law abolished or at least modify the law, because the present law made minimum punishment 3 years, maximum punishment 15 years, which means that the judge cannot do anything but putting people to jail.
And should it be scrapped?
Yes, this law should be abolished or, as I said, modified, because the law only helps those in power, doesn't help the powerless, and doesn't help the monarchy either.
But to this day, nothing much has changed. Article 112 of the Lese Majeste Law remains in force. The government is hoping that a mutual understanding can be reached between the student movements and the government through a political reconciliation committee that it helped set up. The reconciliation panel was set up as a means of resolving the problems once and for all.
There are at the moment committees setting up to amend the constitution and also to try to listen to the different side of the protesters, which are many groups with different opinions. So hopefully that the reconciliation committee that being set up will be joined and also involve as many as possible different group of citizens of Thai who have different opinions. Currently, Thailand has democracy in place with the king as the head of state. So whatever the reason that the protesters or the demonstrators now can voice their opinion within this law and the constitution or even the reform, it can be easily done if through the dialogue, which is peacefully and constructive way that benefit the society, we can go forward like this.
But the students have so far rejected the proposal and refused to be part of the reconciliation panel. They see it as nothing more than a ploy to keep Prime Minister Prayut Chan in power, thereby making reconciliation efforts much harder to achieve. But as a sign of change, the king is now seen to be spending an unusually longer time and is increasingly more visible in Thailand. He also had more opportunities to meet and greet many of his ardent supporters, stepping up public appearances to help boost the image of the monarchy in the eyes of the people.
The monarchy itself has realized that he has to go through a reform, but his own reform, as he gave this interview to CNN that it's the land of the compromise, right? And I think he's trying to, in his own version, working more, you see, not going back to Germany. Every day there's a news of all of these projects, all of these appearances in various different places. So I think he realized that that particular closeness needs to be recreated again, or else it would be a very problematic situation where people would ask what's, the use of having the monarchy if that closeness, the traditional link between the population and the monarchy has been what we call disrupted. So I think the whole process of reform of the monarchy has already started. It's already kick-started, but on their terms now at the moment.
But the question is, will that be enough to calm the sentiment of the younger generation of Thais who are clamoring for change?
หลังจากนี้เนี่ยสิ่งที่หลายๆคนหวังว่าอยากจะเห็นนะคะหนูว่ามันคือความเปลี่ยนแปลงครั้งยิ่งใหญ่ที่อำนาจจะกลับมาเป็นของประชาชนอย่างแท้จริงหนูว่าอันนี้คือสิ่งที่หลายๆคนอยากเห็นอย่างน้อยๆ3ข้อเรียกร้องเรายังคงมีความหวังว่าอยากให้มันเกิดขึ้นจริงๆคนเริ่มเข้าใจตรงกันแล้วว่ามันเป็นการต่อสู้ระยะยาวนั่นก็คือการปกปักรักษาความเป็นประชาธิปไตยนี้ไว้แล้วต่อยอดต้นประชาธิปไตยตรงนี้ไปเรื่อยๆกระจายความเข้าใจพื้นฐานว่าเราในฐานะประชาชนเรามีสิทธิ์ทำอะไรได้บ้างให้กับคนในสังคมให้ได้มากที่สุด
For now, at least, the future of Thailand remains uncertain. The government has already offered an olive branch to the students. But it appears that it might not be enough to dispel the air of distrust surrounding both the protesters and the government in power. What more can it do to end the crisis?
The government should see it in a very different light and should find newer solutions, to deal with it, which is very simple. Go down and talk to them. You don't need to use any harder measures or anything like that. Try to strike a compromise. And if the students are not reasonable enough, they would lose the support from the society. And I don't understand why the state is not playing this game, yet. Maybe they are still waiting for the right time to strike this. We have to wait and see.
The Thai government is still very optimistic that the mechanism being installed at the moment, whether it will be the amendment of the constitution, whether it will be the setting up of the reconciliation committee, will be able to help and we will be able to solve all the conflict and all the problems without having to go through the other tougher roads that people are thinking and afraid of.
การประนีประนอมมันก็เกิดจากที่รัฐบาลยอมประชาชนตอนนี้รัฐบาลไม่ประนีประนอมเราก็ไม่ประนีประนอมกับรัฐบาลนะครับผมคือผมคิดว่าอย่างผมจะขอยกตัวอย่างตรงนี้นะฮะว่าประเทศไทยเราเนี่ยตอนนี้เหมือนอยู่ที่3แยกนะฮะประชาชนขับมาถึง3แยกทีนี้มันก็เลี้ยวซ้ายเลี้ยวขวานะฮะเลี้ยวซ้ายไปสู่การปฏิรูปคือการที่ชนชั้นนำยอมปรับตัวให้เข้ากับโลกที่มันเปลี่ยนไปให้กับความต้องการของประชาชนกับชนชั้นนำไม่ยอมปรับตัวแล้วจะเข้าสู่การแตกหัก
The prospects for a compromise appear remote, at least for now, as both sides continue to dig in their heels in a bold effort at gaining the upper hand in the protracted crisis. But by resisting change, many fear that the likelihood of a dangerous confrontation will continue. Is there really hope emerging on the horizon? As the sun is setting in the land of smiles, it also comes with promises of dreams and new beginnings. The question is, will it be for the better or for worse?